California proves itself to be at least slightly more sane than either Maine or Colorado, if you can believe it. California's Secretary of State is formally refusing to take up the state's lieutenant governor's request from last week to kick President Trump off the ballot in the wake of the ruling from Colorado's Supreme Court. The Secretary, Shirley Weber, wrote in a previous statement, quote, "Removing a candidate from the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is not something my office takes lightly, and is not as simple as the requirement that a person be at least 35 years old to be president," end quote. Perhaps that last part was a dig at the Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Kounalakis, who, in her original letter asking for President Trump to be disqualified from California's 2024 ballot, completely goofed on the presidential age requirement set down by the Constitution, all while pretending to be some great champion of the Constitution, as if she totally knows that document inside and out and isn't trying to use it for partisan ends. No way. She had thought the age requirement was 40 instead of 35. A later edition of the letter revised the age down to what the Constitution sets it as. Perhaps the only reason why California isn't doing what Maine just did with its own Secretary of State is because Governor Gavin Newsom wants to be president one day, and he is very good at playing it being a smooth operator, and so he came out against kicking Trump off the ballot, knowing exactly when to dial back on the progressive craziness in order to not fully alienate moderates and independents. So now taking a look at Maine and their Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows. She made her disqualification ruling late yesterday, but just like the Colorado Supreme Court, she stayed her own decision into early next year in order for the U.S. Supreme Court to review. And while we can be confident that they will rule against this now, it won't always be this way. The left wants to pack the courts. They've been very open about that since day one, when Biden entered office and created a commission to explore that very possibility. And as for what we know about Bellows, well, she's another Nina Jankowicz. If you can remember her, the former theater kid who Biden wanted to lead the dismantled Government Disinformation Board. Bellows served as executive director for her state's ACLU chapter for nearly 10 years, where she focused on voters' rights. If this irony isn't enough to prove to you that voting rights activists and get out the vote activists are nothing but left-wing partisan hacks trying to solidify one-party rule by Democrats forever, then I don't know what is. Turns out Bellows also went on a Zoom call with her other Secretary of State girlies who are totally going to save democracy by ending it. We should be so grateful. But given Bellows' work with the ACLU to change voting laws before ever getting to her state position, it bears keeping in mind what the host of the Chronicles magazine podcast, which is one of my favorites by the way, has to say about the leftist revolution overall. CJ Engel argues, quote, "Culture isn't changing, it is being changed. Some of the greatest misunderstandings of our age stem from attributing to organic developments those things which are distinctly artificial. And so much of this artificiality, this cultural subversion, is driven by private sector institutions. Advertising, product development, the arts. You don't understand our time if you still operate on a public versus private 1800s model. Capital drives the revolution that seeks the death of the residues of the Old West," end quote. And that's exactly right. Our complaints are about government, and that's true enough as far as things go. But what is shaping our government? And oftentimes, what does so by circumventing our normal electoral procedures. Nominally, private activist groups do, like the ACLU. Big business does, big tech and big pharma and others like them. It's a giant revolving door in DC between government and so-called private jobs. At this point, the government jobs are designed to land an officially massive salary at some border corporation as long as they shill for them hard enough while in office, which necessarily means those companies are who are dictating how the government behaves. We saw that especially being true during the COVID years, and now today with elections being bought and sold by these types. And I can give you one more immediate example. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine just vetoed that bill to protect children from transgender hormones and surgeries, and which protects female sports from male athletes. Imagine that, a Republican governor given a slam dunk piece of legislation called the SAFE Act, and he swings and misses on it, trying to hide behind the idea that such medical decisions should be left up to parents and their doctors. Leave the government out of it, like Reagan would do, I guess. I don't know, whatever his argument is. Basically inverting and perverting our own pro-parent and limited government policies against us, completely disordering them from their just ends and making them serve him because he got afraid of this political football. Thankfully, the word is that Ohio's legislature has enough votes to override DeWine's veto, which makes one think, why did he veto it in the first place? Wouldn't he want to take credit for something that is popular with the base? Well, a friend of the show, Terry Schilling, the president of the American Principles Project, thinks he has an idea on what's going on. One factor he points out is that it seems DeWine wanted to land a cushy hospital lobbying gig after his time in office.